Nobody believes you. The words exploded from Donald Trump's mouth, echoing through the hearing room like a hammer blow. For a split second, silence followed. Then a storm began. Because when Trump speaks, he doesn't just insult one woman, he insults millions. Over 62 million Americans have reported facing racial discrimination in their lifetime. More than 400 years of injustice still bleed into today's headlines. And in that room stood Jasmine Crockett, labeled worthless by the most powerful man in the country, yet refusing to bow. This wasn't just a hearing, it was a battlefield. One voice against the weight of power, one woman against a president, and the world was watching. The gavel struck once, a sharp crack that should have commanded order. But the room was already suffocating under the weight of something far heavier than protocol. Hatred, suspicion, rage. It hung in the air like smoke after a fire, filling every corner of the chamber. The journalists shifted in their seats, cameras whirring. Every lens pointed toward two figures sitting across from each other, one cloaked in raw power, the other armored with conviction. Donald J. Trump, the 47th President of the United States, leaned back in his chair like a king guarding his throne. His eyes gleamed with defiance, his jaw tight, his hands resting on the table, with the confidence of someone who believed the law could never touch him. Across from him sat Jasmine Crockett. She wasn't smiling. She wasn't pretending. Her eyes locked on him with the precision of a blade. Every muscle in her face radiated a single message. I am not afraid of you. The chair recognized her. Jasmine rose slowly, her palms pressing against the polished wood of the table. The room seemed to bend toward her, waiting. Her voice cut through the heavy silence like glass shattering. Mr. President, you lied to the American people. Gas rippled through the chamber. Cameras clicked like gunfire. Somewhere in the gallery, a muffled voice whispered, "She actually said it." Trump's lips twisted into a smirk that hardened into something darker. He slammed his hand on the desk, the sound booming through the microphone. The echo rattled like thunder, silencing even the whispers. "Nobody believes you," he barked, every word dripping with contempt. His voice wasn't just loud, it was invasive, crawling over every ear, daring anyone to challenge him. Jasmine didn't flinch. She leaned forward, her gaze unbroken, and replied with steel in her tone. "They don't have to believe me. They only have to believe the truth." The room crackled, the tension snapping like electric wires overhead. Reporters scribbled furiously, desperate to capture every syllable. Trump snarled, pointing a finger at her like the barrel of a gun. "You're pathetic, a puppet. Nobody respects you, Jasmine. Not here, not out there." He gestured broadly, as if the entire nation were seated behind him, nodding in agreement. His chest puffed with arrogance, but Jasmine's reply came swift and merciless. "Respect isn't given by tyrants. It's earned in the fight against them." The words landed like a blow. A murmur surged through the crowd. Approval, disbelief, awe, all tangled into one roaring undercurrent. Trump's face flushed red, a storm rising in his eyes. He leaned closer to the microphone, his voice lowering into a growl that slithered across the room. "You think you can embarrass me? In my America? You'll regret this." Jasmine didn't hesitate. She slammed her hand down, the crack of flesh against wood echoing louder than his threat. "This is not your America. It belongs to the people you tried to silence." The chamber erupted. Some in the audience clapped before being hushed by guards. Others gasped, torn between fear and exhilaration. The atmosphere had shifted. This was no longer a hearing. It was a duel, a verbal fistfight carried out under fluorescent lights. The moderator tried to intervene, gaveling again and again, but the gavel was a whisper against the hurricane. Trump leaned back, forcing a laugh that sounded more like a growl. "You're nothing but noise, Jasmine, a footnote in history." Jasmine's reply came with fire. "If I'm noise, then I'll be the noise that wakes this nation up." Every camera lens zoomed in. Every microphone strained closer. America wasn't just watching, it was holding its breath. For a heartbeat, the two locked eyes. Trump's glare was venom. Jasmine's stare was fire. The clash between them wasn't measured in words anymore. It was measured in willpower, In the invisible war of who would blink first, neither did. The moderator's voice trembled as he tried once more. Order in the chamber. But order was gone. The hearing had transformed into a battleground, and no gavel could bring it back. The world was witnessing something raw, something unforgettable. The moment a president tried to crush a woman with words, only to find her words sharper than his threats. And this was only the beginning. If this is the kind of raw truth you believe deserves to be told, if you want more stories where power collides with justice and justice refuses to bow, then let this be your sign. Subscribe now to Harrison Stories and never miss the fight for truth. The cameras didn't blink. Neither did Jasmine. Her shoulders squared, her jaw locked tight. She could feel the weight of the chamber pressing against her lungs, but she refused to inhale fear. This was not the moment to retreat. This was the moment to strike. Her words came fast, precise, sharpened to a deadly point. Mr. President, power doesn't rewrite reality. Power doesn't erase lies. And power won't save you from accountability. The words sliced through the air like steel. Reporters gasped audibly. A senator in the back adjusted his glasses, stunned. Trump tilted his head back, a humorless smile cracking across his face. He raised a single finger, wagging it slowly like a teacher scolding a child. Wrong. Completely wrong, he sneered. Then his voice rose, booming, forceful, carried by the microphone like a cannon blast. I am the sitting president of the United States. Do you understand what that means? My word carries the weight of the Oval Office. My authority is unmatched. He jabbed the finger toward her like a dagger. You are nothing but a loud mouth trying to play hero. The audience froze. The words carried arrogance, but also a dangerous truth. Power was on his side, but Jasmine's eyes burned brighter. She didn't blink. She didn't breathe. And then she struck again. Authority is not immunity, Mr. President. You think this chair protects you? You think that seal on your chest is a shield. But it's a mask, and masks always fall. Her voice cracked like thunder, reverberating against the marble walls. Trump's smirk faltered for the first time. His hands clenched into fists. The microphone picked up the rasp of his breath, heavy and sharp. He tried to laugh, but it came out brittle, forced. Typical. Another nobody trying to lecture me about power. I built this country back from ruin. I made America strong again. Stronger than ever. Do you think anyone cares what you say? Jasmine didn't flinch. She leaned forward, her voice dropping lower, colder, each syllable deliberate as a scalpel. Yes, they care. Because unlike you, I'm not selling them fantasies. I'm showing them facts. And facts don't bow to your ego. The words landed like bullets, each one tearing deeper. Trump's face darkened. The room tensed. Every senator sat stiff, their eyes flicking nervously between the two combatants. Journalists were scribbling so fast their pens scratched like static. Cameras whirred. The gallery was silent, yet bursting with the electricity of a storm. Trump slammed his palm against the table again. Enough! The shout rattled the ceiling. The gavel struck desperately, but nobody looked at the moderator. All eyes were fixed on the fire blazing across the table. Trump leaned in, his words venomous. You think you can intimidate me? I am the president. I decide what is true. I decide what this nation believes. A hush swept the chamber. Even his allies seemed unsettled. The arrogance was naked now, unmasked and heavy. Jasmine rose from her chair. The scrape of wood against stone floor echoed like a drumbeat. She didn't shout. She didn't need to. Her voice was steady, surgical, aimed directly at the heart of his declaration. No, Mr. President, you don't decide truth. You tried to bend it, twist it, drown it. But truth survived you, and the people see it now, clearer than ever. The silence was deafening. Trump's mouth opened, but no words came. His face flushed scarlet, the fury boiling, choking his breath. His hand trembled on the desk. Whether from rage or fear, no one could tell. The chamber was strung so tight it might snap at any second. Senators whispered nervously to aides. Reporters exchanged wide-eyed looks. The crowd in the gallery leaned forward, barely daring to breathe. The clash was no longer just between two voices. It was between two visions of America. One built on fear, the other built on defiance. And Jasmine Crockett had just landed the first blow that drew blood. The hearing wasn't just heated, it was incendiary, and everyone knew it would only burn hotter from here. Trump leaned back in his chair, forcing a calmness onto his face, as though the firestorm seconds ago hadn't shaken him. The smirk returned, but this time it carried calculation. He adjusted his tie, lifted the microphone slightly closer, and spoke with a deliberate ease. Congresswoman, with all due respect, your questions are confusing. Your facts are cherry-picked. The American people know that this hearing, this entire charade, is nothing more than a political circus. Gas rippled across the chamber. The insult was sharp, but the tactic was clear. Redirect, muddy the water, paint himself as the victim. Jasmine's lips tightened. She had seen this play before. Avoid the question, twist the meaning, bury the truth under a mountain of rhetoric. But she was ready. Mr. President, let me remind you, this is not a circus. This is sworn testimony under oath. You don't get to rewrite the rules here. Answer the question. Trump chuckled, shaking his head. Answer? To you? Please. You've asked a dozen questions, all loaded, all designed to trap me. That's not how real hearings work. That's a witch hunt. The word hung heavy in the air. Witch hunt. His favorite shield. His loyalists shifted in their seats, nodding. But Jasmine did not flinch. She reached down, picked up a thick binder, and slammed it onto the desk. The crack echoed through the hall. Then let's play by the book. According to Section 301 of House Procedure, I am entitled to request a direct answer. No diversions. No theatrics. Just yes or no. She leaned forward, eyes burning into him. Did you or did you not pressure federal agencies to bury evidence of racial violence under your administration? The room froze. Every camera zoomed in. Every journalist held their pen just above the page, waiting. Trump's smile faltered. He leaned closer to the mic, searching for the right angle, the right loophole. Pressure? What you call pressure, I call leadership. I asked agencies to focus on real threats, terrorism, foreign interference, not whatever narrative you're obsessed with. The words were slippery, crafted to dodge without admitting. But Jasmine was ready for this evasion. So that's a yes, she snapped. You did interfere. You did redirect resources. You did decide that protecting your image was more important than protecting American lives. Trump's jaw tightened. He shook his head violently. No, that's twisting my words. You see what she does? She bends every sentence. She's playing games with semantics. Now his voice was louder, harsher. The control he had tried to reclaim was slipping again. But Jasmine didn't let go. Her voice was cool, methodical, the scalpel against his blunt hammer. Semantics don't erase consequences, Mr. President. You can dodge, you can spin, but the record doesn't lie. And I'll enter every one of these documents into evidence if you keep dancing around the truth. She tapped the binder with a manicured finger. Page 142, page 368, page 501, each one bearing your signature, your directive, your command. So I'll ask again, yes or no? Trump's face flushed. The strategy game was no longer just about words, it was about law, procedure, and the crushing weight of documented fact. The senators shifted uncomfortably. Some whispered to their aides, others buried their faces in papers, unwilling to meet the cameras. The tension was unbearable. Trump leaned into the mic, his voice dropping into a growl. I will not be cornered by your cheap tricks. I am the President of the United States. I don't answer to you. I don't answer to this mockery. The moderator raised his gavel, but the sound was drowned out by the collective intake of breath from the audience. The sheer defiance was staggering. Jasmine exhaled slowly, then straightened her back. Her tone sharpened, precise as a chess master calling check. You don't answer to me, Mr. President. You answer to the people. And every time you twist your words, you insult them. Every second you refuse a clear answer, you prove exactly why you're sitting in that chair today. The chamber erupted, not with noise, but with silence. A silence so thick it felt suffocating. Trump's eyes darted around the room, searching for allies. Jasmine stood steady, unyielding, the hunter who had just tightened the trap. This was no longer a shouting match. This was chess, move by move, word by word, procedure by procedure. And tonight, the advantage belonged to Jasmine Crockett. But she wasn't done, not even close. She reached for the binder again, flipping with a calmness that disguised the dynamite in her hands. The pages whispered as they turned, but the silence of the room amplified every movement. Then, she stopped, her fingers pressed firmly on a single sheet, one marked with a red tab. Slowly, deliberately, she lifted it for all to see. "Mr. President," Jasmine said, her voice steady but vibrating with restrained fire, "this is a memorandum signed by you on October 14th, directing federal agencies to withhold reports on racially motivated violence in order to protect the national image." The words detonated. The chamber exploded with gasps. Reporters leapt from their seats. Cameras zoomed in. Pens scratched furiously across notepads. Senators turned wide-eyed, some covering their mouths, others whispering with urgency to aides who bolted for the exits. The gallery stirred, a wave of disbelief sweeping across like a storm surge. Trump's face drained of color, then flushed crimson in an instant. He jolted forward, his voice a roar. "Lies! Absolute lies! That document is fabricated. Fake! You can't prove a thing!" He slammed the table with both hands, the sound reverberating like a gunshot. But Jasmine didn't flinch. She placed the sheet flat against the microphone stand, letting the cameras capture every word, every signature, every damning detail. "Fabricated?" Her voice dripped with ice. "Then explain why the signature matches the one on your executive orders. Explain why this document was released under the Freedom of Information Act. Explain why your own chief of staff forwarded it to senior officials with your personal seal." Trump's mouth opened, but words tangled in his throat. He coughed, stammered, then tried to regain composure. "You don't understand context. That memo was never official policy. It was a draft. A suggestion. A private note?" Jasmine cut him off, her hand slicing through the air. "Private notes don't carry executive seals. Drafts don't get distributed to 6 federal agencies. And suggestions don't silence reports of dozens of hate crimes in the year that followed." Her voice thundered. The evidence was a hammer pounding through every attempt at denial. The senators shifted again, their unease now unmistakable. Even Trump's allies looked down at their notes, refusing to meet his eye. The cameras captured it all. The paper, the signature, the President of the United States trembling under its weight. And then came the moment that froze time. One reporter whispered into a hot mic, his voice unintentionally echoing across the feed. "Oh my God, she just cornered the president." The chamber erupted again, this time not with gasps, but with murmurs of disbelief. The sound swelled, rising like a tidal wave, until the gavel pounded in a desperate attempt to restore order. But the order was gone. Trump lunged at the microphone, shouting over the chaos. "This is a sham, a total sham. You're weaponizing paperwork, twisting reality, trying to destroy me because you know I'm stronger than you'll ever be." His words sprayed fire, but they were the words of a man cornered, flailing, scrambling for oxygen. Jasmine remained still, her composure unshaken, her voice dropping to a deadly whisper that cut through the storm. "No, Mr. President, I'm not destroying you. You signed your own downfall." The silence that followed was louder than any shout. Every eye was locked on Trump, his sweat, his fury, his hands gripping the table so tightly his knuckles whitened. The aura of invincibility he carried into the chamber was gone. What remained was a man exposed. And for the first time that night, Donald Trump looked small. The audience at home could feel it too. Across televisions, across screens, across countless living rooms, viewers leaned in closer, holding their breath, hearts racing as if they themselves sat in that chamber. The wow moment had arrived. The shift in momentum was undeniable, and the fight for truth had just landed its hardest punch. Subscribe now to Harrison Stories, where moments like this are captured, remembered, and never forgotten. Because history isn't just told, it's witnessed, and history was roaring in real time. Trump lurched forward, his face inches from the microphone, the cords in his neck straining, his voice tearing through the chamber like a siren. "This is treason. This is an attack on the presidency itself." The volume cracked the speakers. Static buzzed through the air, the mic hissing under the sheer force of his rage. The sound rattled in the chest of every person present, shaking the wooden desks, vibrating in the marble walls. Some senators flinched at the noise. Others froze, locked in their seats like statues. But Jasmine Crockett did not flinch. She leaned forward, her own mic picking up her voice with crisp clarity, and let her words slice through the static like a blade through fog. No, Mr. President, this isn't treason. This is truth, and truth doesn't fear your shouting. It drowns it. The chamber shook again, not from Trump's roar this time, but from the sheer authority in her tone. Reporters scribbled furiously, their pens barely able to keep pace. The live feed cut between her face and his, the split screen capturing a clash so raw, it felt less like politics and more like war. Trump slammed the desk, the noise booming like thunder. You're nothing. You're a fraud, a liar, a disgrace to this nation. The words spewed like fire, each syllable scorched with fury. But Jasmine fired back instantly, her timing surgical. And yet here you are unraveling under my questions. A strong man doesn't scream to prove his strength. A guilty man does. The audience gasped, some hands flying to mouths, others clutching at their chest as if struck. It was more than debate now. It was blood sport. Every phrase was a punch, every rebuttal a counterstrike, every second another fracture in the mask of power. Social media ignited in real time. Clips from the live stream splintered into hundreds of edits within minutes. One showed Trump pounding the desk, another froze on Jasmine's defiant glare, another looped her last line, "A guilty man does," over and over like an anthem. Twitter trended with hashtags. Facebook lit up with shares. YouTube chat feeds scrolled so fast the words blurred into streaks of white. The world wasn't just watching. The world was amplifying. Trump bellowed again, straining his throat. "I am the president. You can't speak to me like this. You can't." His voice cracked. The mic screeched with feedback. His desperation echoed louder than his words. And Jasmine, calm as a blade drawn from a sheath, delivered her reply with lethal precision. "I just did, and millions heard it." The room shuddered under the weight of her statement. It wasn't just a response. It was a verdict. The journalists in the gallery nearly fell over themselves, jostling to capture the moment. Flashbulbs exploded. The clatter of camera shutters became a storm in its own right. On the live stream, commentators whispered breathlessly, "This is history. This is the collapse of the presidential shield in real time." Trump tried again, words tumbling out too fast, broken by rage. No, you don't understand. This is all politics. This is all hate." But Jasmine's voice cut sharper, louder, each word timed to slam into his unraveling sentences. "No, Mr. President, this is accountability. This is justice. This is the reckoning you've been running from." The room erupted into silence again. Not the silence of boredom, but of awe, of disbelief, of people frozen in the face of something they knew would never be forgotten. Even Trump's allies shifted uneasily, some baring their heads, others refusing to make eye contact with the cameras. Jasmine had become the storm. Every syllable she spoke rolled like thunder. Every rebuttal split the air like lightning. And Trump, for all his roaring, was being drowned, his voice loud but hers undeniable. The spectacle was no longer just politics. It was theater. It was combat. It was history unfolding like fire on dry grass. And there was no stopping it now. Trump leaned forward, eyes flashing with the feral energy of a cornered predator. His voice rose, sharp as broken glass. "You think you're here for justice?" he spat, stabbing the air with a finger toward Jasmine. "No, you're here because you want power. You're nothing but a political opportunist, hungry for attention, desperate to tear me down for your own gain." The accusation cracked across the chamber like thunder. Gasps rippled through the audience. Cameras zoomed in, hungry for every twitch of expression, every beat of sweat. For a heartbeat, the room teetered. Trump smirked, convinced he had landed his blow. His shoulders squared, his chest puffed. He thought he had shifted the spotlight, made Jasmine the accused, not him. But Jasmine did not flinch. Her posture was carved from stone, Her eyes locked onto him with a steadiness that carried the weight of unshakable conviction. She let the silence stretch, heavy and unbearable, until even the reporters forgot to type. Then she spoke. "You call this power?" Her voice cut through the air, low but electric, building like a storm. "I am not the one who sat in the Oval Office and twisted the truth to serve myself. I am not the one who used the weight of the presidency to intimidate, to silence, to corrupt." Her words struck like hammer blows, each syllable echoing louder than Trump's roar. "You think I'm desperate for attention?" She pressed, her tone rising, sharp as steel. "No, Mr. President. The only desperation in this room is yours, because you know the truth is catching up, and it terrifies you." The chamber erupted. Applause burst from corners where decorum was supposed to reign. Even some senators shifted uneasily. Caught in the storm Jasmine unleashed. Trump's jaw clenched. His hands gripped the table so tight the knuckles whitened. He tried to interrupt, to bark back, but Jasmine raised her hand, commanding the space, commanding the moment, and somehow, impossibly, he fell silent. She went on, her cadence relentless, her voice ringing with a fire no microphone could distort. "You accuse me of playing politics? No, sir. What I am doing is defending truth. What I am doing is holding power accountable. What I am doing is something you have never dared, speaking not for myself, but for the people who trusted you and whom you betrayed." Every sentence landed like a strike, the rhythm unbreakable. Reporters typed furiously, social media flared, hashtags igniting in real time. Screens across the nation lit up with her defiance. And Trump, loud, brash, unyielding Trump, looked smaller than he ever had before. His face flushed, his eyes darted, his voice, when it returned, came out uneven, cracked with frustration. "This is a witch hunt," he bellowed, slamming his palm on the desk. "This is corruption at the highest level. You are the danger to this country." But the chamber no longer believed him. The audience wasn't hearing desperation as strength. They were hearing panic masquerading as power. Jasmine seized the moment, her words slicing through the air with merciless precision. "The danger to this country," she declared, "is a man who fears the truth so much he will smear anyone who dares to confront him. The danger is a leader who weaponizes lies, who hides behind bluster, who screams witch hunt when the evidence shines too bright to ignore." And as the crowd rose, clapping, cheering, unable to contain themselves, Trump's expression faltered. For the first time it was clear. The game was slipping from his hands. The cameras captured it all. The fury, the collapse, the clash that was no longer equal. Trump had played his dirtiest card, but Jasmine had turned it into his undoing. The smell of fear lingered in the air like smoke after fire. And across the nation, millions watching knew the tide was turning. Because in this chamber, power no longer belonged to volume. It belonged to truth. And truth, it turned out, was the spark that set the whole room on fire. The roar began with Trump's voice, booming, ragged, desperate. "This is a sham, a complete disgrace," he shouted, jabbing a finger toward Jasmine like it was a weapon. But then, almost instantly, his allies leapt into the fray. One senator rose from his seat, red-faced, shouting over the microphone. Another pounded the desk with a fist. A third cut across the room with a voice like a whip, accusing Jasmine of grandstanding and disrespecting the presidency. The chamber erupted. It wasn't debate anymore. It was battle. The chairman slammed the gavel once, then twice, then again and again, the sharp cracks cutting through the air. "Order!" he barked, his voice hoarse. "Order in this chamber!" But no one listened. Every corner of the room was alive with noise, shouts colliding with shouts, accusations layered over denials. Cameras swiveled wildly, trying to capture it all, the chaos spilling like a storm across every screen in the nation. For the audience watching at home, it was no longer a hearing. It was war. Trump leaned into the chaos, feeding it, his voice tearing through the din. "She's a liar! She's a fraud!" he thundered, gesturing so broadly the microphone squealed with static. "You're all watching a setup, a conspiracy against me." His supporters echoed the words like a chorus, pounding their fists, waving their hands, drowning out the silence that justice demanded. But in the middle of the storm, one figure stood still. Jasmine Crockett. Her eyes did not waver. Her hands rested calmly on the table before her. She didn't shout. She didn't flinch. She simply watched. Watched the frenzy swirl around her. Watched Trump claw at the walls of his own crumbling fortress. Watched the men around him turn the chamber into a circus of noise. And then, when the chaos reached its peak, she spoke. Her voice wasn't loud, but it was enough. "Mr. Chairman," she said, her tone sharp, precise, cutting through the uproar like a blade through glass. Heads turned, voices faltered. She continued, steady as stone. If the truth were not so damning, the former president would not need an army of voices to drown out one woman. The words hit like thunder. A hush fell, broken only by the frantic tapping of reporters, desperate to capture every syllable. Trump tried to interrupt, but his voice cracked, trampled by the silence that now amplified hers. She leaned forward, eyes blazing. "This chamber is not a circus," she declared. "It is not a playground for theatrics. It is where power must answer to truth. And no matter how many voices try to scream it down, the truth will stand." For a heartbeat, the room froze. Then chaos struck again, louder, more frantic, as though Trump's camp sensed the tide slipping, felt the gravity pulling against them. One senator rose so aggressively his chair toppled backward with a crash. Another shouted over the chairman's gavel, his words unintelligible beneath the clamor. The chamber looked less like the seat of democracy than a battlefield torn open by rage. Yet Jasmine remained unshaken. Her gaze never faltered. Her voice never cracked. She sat there like a warrior in the eye of the storm, undaunted, unmovable. And that image burned across the screens of millions. Social media lit up, hashtags exploding. Memes were born in real time. Jasmine sitting calm while the chamber dissolved into madness, her stare immortalized in pixels. Commentators whispered about the look of steel, about the moment she seized the hearing. Trump shouted again, veins bulging in his neck, but the desperation was written across his face. He no longer looked like the master of chaos. He looked like a man consumed by it, and everyone watching could feel it. The more disorder he unleashed, the more dignity Jasmine gained. It was not just a clash of voices anymore. It was a clash of legacies. By the time the chairman finally banged the gavel loud enough to silence the room, the damage was done. The chamber was shaken. The people watching were breathless. And Jasmine Crockett, against the storm, had not moved an inch. The hearing was no longer just testimony. It was spectacle. It was history unfolding in chaos. And through it all, one truth rang louder than the noise. Trump's fury was fire. Jasmine's resolve was iron. And iron does not burn, but iron can strike. And Jasmine Crockett knew exactly when. The chamber, still quivering from the chaos, began to settle into uneasy silence. Trump leaned back in his chair, smirking, believing he had shifted the tides with sheer noise. Reporters scribbled furiously. Cameras zoomed in on his grin, as if the storm he summoned had won him ground. But Jasmine did not smile. Instead, she reached into the thick folder by her side, fingers deliberate, slow, like a chess master preparing the final move. The room sensed it before it happened. The scrape of paper, the measured lift of her hand, it was enough to make the air tighten, and then she laid it on the table. A document, thick, stamped, marked confidential. The word glared from the page like a flare. The chamber froze. Every head turned. The noise collapsed into silence, so sudden it rang louder than the shouting had. Trump's grin faltered. For the first time that night, his hand twitched against the table, knuckles whitening. Jasmine leaned forward, her eyes locked on him, her voice calm, almost cold. "Mr. President," she said, the title dragged out like a judgment, "you've spent this hearing trying to drown the truth, but truth has a way of surfacing." Her hand slid across the document, her fingertip tapping the bold black stamp. "This," she continued, "isn't rumor. It isn't hearsay. It's your own record." Gasps rippled across the chamber. Reporters leaned so far forward they looked ready to tumble from their seats. Trump shot up in his chair. "That's fake! You can't—" But his voice cracked, and the microphones caught it. Jasmine didn't flinch. She turned the first page, eyes never leaving his face, reading aloud in a voice that carried like steel. It wasn't just words, it was proof. Numbers, signatures, timelines, evidence that unraveled the story Trump had tried to weave around himself. Each sentence fell like a hammer, and with every blow Trump shifted. His jaw tightened. His hands gripped the edge of the desk. A sheen of sweat began to shine under the harsh lights. The man who had roared minutes earlier now looked cornered. Jasmine's voice cut through the silence. "You wanted to play loud, Mr. President, but justice doesn't shout. Justice speaks. And tonight, it speaks with your own words." The gallery stirred, low murmurs swelling into audible shock. Some gasped, others covered their mouths. The weight of the moment pressed on every shoulder in the room. Trump tried to cut in again, voice desperate. "Lies! More lies!" But even as he shouted, the rhythm was gone. The power had slipped. The document had stolen it. And everyone watching knew it. The shift was palpable. It was no longer Jasmine reacting to Trump's chaos. It was Trump reacting to hers. She had flipped the board. The man who once dictated the tempo was now stumbling to keep up. Social media lit up again, screenshots of the word confidential flashing across millions of feeds, captions screaming, "The moment everything changed." The narrative was shifting in real time, and Trump, who thrived in storms, found himself drowning in silence. Jasmine closed the file with a deliberate thud, the sound echoing through the chamber. Then she leaned back, eyes steady, her voice calm. "I don't need to shout, Mr. President. The truth is loud enough." The silence that followed was deafening. The chairman glanced nervously at Trump, then back at Jasmine. Senators whispered among themselves, caught between disbelief and awe. And across the nation, millions of viewers leaned closer to their screens, hearts pounding. They could feel it. The turning point. The hearing was no longer just noise and fury. It was revelation. The game had changed, and Jasmine Crockett had just rewritten the rules. But the night was far from finished. Because sometimes truth doesn't just live on paper. Sometimes it walks into the room. The double doors at the back of the chamber creaked open, pulling every eye in the hall. The clerk's voice rang out, steady, official. "Call the witness." The shuffle of footsteps echoed across the marble floor. And then, gasps. Reporters lurched to their feet. Cameras swung like searchlights. The air shivered with disbelief. A man stepped forward. Not a politician, not a pundit, but someone who had been inside the machinery, someone who had seen the gears turn from within. The weight of his presence was enough to change the air. Trump stiffened, his face already tight, drained of its swagger. He knew this man. The witness raised his right hand, swore the oath, and sat. His eyes darted once toward Trump, then fixed squarely on Jasmine. The silence was unbearable. Jasmine leaned forward, her voice low, sharp, deliberate. "Please state your name for the record." The man did. His voice cracked, but only once. And then, with the whole nation hanging on the edge of his words, he began. His testimony cut through the chamber like glass breaking. Dates, transactions, conversations behind closed doors, words spoken when the cameras were gone, words Trump never thought would surface. Each line was a blow. Each detail was a nail in the coffin. The gallery gasped, whispered, then gasped again. The room felt alive with shock, like electricity sparking across every body present. Trump's face darkened, red bleeding into purple. He slammed a hand against the desk. "Lies!" he thundered, spit catching in the microphone. "This is all lies, a setup, a disgusting, pathetic attempt to smear me." But his roar rang hollow, because the witness did not flinch. He kept speaking, stronger now, each word weighted with the kind of authority only truth can carry. And Jasmine didn't interrupt. She let the testimony unfold, her eyes fixed on Trump, watching the fury drain into desperation. Every viewer at home could see it. The shift. The man who had ruled the chamber with noise was now cornered by silence and testimony. The storm that once belonged to him now belonged to her. The witness's words built into a crescendo, exposing contradictions, unveiling secrets that Trump had buried under years of bluster. And when he finished, When the last damning line fell into the air, the chamber erupted. Gasps turned into cries, cries into shouts, the room splitting wide open like a fault line cracking. Some shouted in defense, others demanded order, and the chairman's gavel struck like a desperate drumbeat. But the story had already left the room. Within seconds, phones lit up with breaking news alerts. Networks cut into live coverage, Chiron banners screaming across the bottom of the screen. Bombshell testimony rocks hearing. Trump's voice broke through the pandemonium again, ragged, furious. This is a witch hunt, a disgrace, fabricated from start to finish. But the more he shouted, the more obvious it became. This wasn't strength. This was panic. Jasmine finally leaned forward, her voice calm, carrying through the chaos like a bell. "Mr. President," she said, "truth doesn't tremble. Only power does." The line rippled through the chamber, carried by reporters, amplified by headlines, immortalized in posts that would spread across millions of screens before the night was over. And as Trump's face flushed deeper red, as his words stumbled over one another, as the fury in his voice turned brittle, one thing became clear to everyone watching. The balance had broken. The man who once stood untouchable was now staggering, and Jasmine Crockett was the one who had pushed him to the edge. The chamber buzzed with disbelief. The witness sat firm, unshaken. The chairman's gavel finally brought the room back to a trembling silence. But the silence wasn't relief. It was anticipation. Because everyone knew what had just happened wasn't the end. It was the beginning of Trump's unraveling. And the world had just witnessed the first thread pulled loose. But Jasmine Crockett wasn't done. Not even close. Her eyes locked on Trump like a predator circling prey. She leaned forward, the chamber heavy with anticipation, her voice sharp enough to cut through steel. "Mr. President," she said, "you've dodged, you've shouted, you've denied. But now I'm going to ask you questions you cannot escape." Trump's jaw tightened. A bead of sweat slid down his temple. He shifted in his chair, but the cameras caught everything. Millions of Americans saw it. The twitch, the discomfort, the break in the mask. Jasmine began. Her questions were not broad. They were razor thin, precise, engineered to corner. "On January 12th at 9:47 p.m., Ash, did you sign this authorization?" Trump opened his mouth, but she cut him off before the denial could form. "Yes or no, Mr. President?" The chamber leaned forward, every ear straining. Trump barked, "This is a setup." Jasmine didn't flinch. "I'll repeat the question, yes or no." The pressure in the room rose like steam. The chairman's gavel hovered in midair but didn't fall. Even he wanted to hear the answer. Trump's face glistened, his collar tight against his neck. He spat words like broken glass. "I don't recall," gasps, murmurs. Fingers hammered keyboards as reporters live-tweeted the unraveling. Jasmine pressed on, relentless. "Then allow me to refresh your memory," she said, sliding another page across the table. The document gleamed under the lights. His signature blared in bold ink at the bottom. Trump's face collapsed into red fury. "That proves nothing," he shouted, his voice cracking, echoing too loud, too desperate. But Jasmine was merciless. "Mr. President, are you saying this is not your signature?" Trump hesitated. That hesitation was everything. The camera zoomed closer. The nation held its breath. His mouth opened. Closed, opened again. Finally, he barked, "It looks like it, but this is taken out of context." The chamber rippled with disbelief. Some senators shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Others shook their heads. The witness from earlier stared down at the desk, silent but damning. Jasmine leaned closer. "Context doesn't change ink," she said. "It doesn't erase facts." Trump slammed his hand down, rattling the microphone. "You don't scare me. None of this scares me," he roared, but his voice betrayed the tremor underneath. The louder he grew, the smaller he looked. And Jasmine knew it. She launched another strike, sharper, faster. Questions firing like bullets, one after another. "Did you meet with him on that date? Did you authorize this payment? Did you use the office of the presidency for personal gain?" Each question landed like a blow. Trump tried to shout, to deny, to twist, but the tempo was Jasmine's, and he couldn't keep pace. His words stumbled, his fury tangled, His sweat glistened under the lights. And still, she pressed. Answer the question, Mr. President. Yes or no? Yes or no? The gallery was silent now. The chaos was gone. All that remained was the sound of Trump's labored breathing, the crack in his voice as he tried to cling to control. Millions watched at home, their living rooms charged with tension, their hearts pounding with the same rhythm as the chamber. It was no longer just politics, it was survival. Who would break first? The warrior or the man clinging to power? Trump's hands gripped the table, knuckles bone white, as if the wood itself was the only thing holding him upright. I will not be intimidated, he shouted, his voice shaking. This is all rigged, rigged. But the word rigged didn't land like it once did. It sounded hollow, thin. The emperor shouting with no throne beneath him. Jasmine didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. She simply asked the next question. Calm, clear, precise. And in that calm, Trump's fury sounded like defeat. The cameras drank in every second. The world leaned closer. And in that chamber, history balanced on a razor's edge, waiting to see which would snap first. Trump's voice or Jasmine's unshakable resolve. Jasmine's hand hovered over the final folder like a blade waiting to strike. The room was a taut wire, humming with anticipation. She drew in a measured breath, then slid the file across the table. This, she said, her voice low, deliberate, resonant, is the piece you cannot talk your way out of. Trump's eyes narrowed. His lips trembled, just slightly. He didn't reach for the folder. He already knew. Jasmine flipped it open herself, revealing not words this time, but images, photographs, time-stamped, corroborated, undeniable. The chamber gasped as one. Every click of a camera shutter sounded like a hammer against Trump's defenses. These documents, Jasmine continued, show your direct involvement, your hand, your signature, your presence. You lied to this committee. You lied to the American people. She turned the page. And here, she said, stabbing a finger at the photo, is proof. Trump's mouth fell open, but no sound came. For the first time, silence clung to him like chains. Then, with a burst of panic, he roared, Fake! Fake evidence! This is doctored! This is the deep state! His voice cracked mid-shout. It was the sound of a man drowning, grasping for words that no longer floated. The senators shifted, whispers flooding the chamber like rising water. Reporters pounded keyboards. The audience, stunned, broke into a wave of murmurs, gasps, and then cheers. The dam had burst. Jasmine didn't even raise her voice. She didn't need to. Her calm made his fury look childish, his desperation naked. Mr. President, she said evenly, you can yell fake 1,000 times, but the truth doesn't bend to your volume. Trump slammed the table, his face red then pale, his breath ragged. This is a witch hunt. You people are criminals. I'm the victim, he bellowed, but the words tumbled out weak, hollow. Jasmine leaned forward, steady as stone. No, Mr. Trump, the victim here is the truth, and you killed it. The chamber erupted. Applause thundered from the gallery. Some senators stood, clapping openly. Cameras flashed like lightning. The energy surged through the air, electric, unstoppable. Trump's face drained of color. For the first time, he didn't look like the fighter, the brawler, the master of spectacle. He looked like a man cornered, unmasked, undone. He tried again, his voice hoarse, cracking. They're lying. She's lying. But the crowd drowned him out. Cheers for Jasmine roared louder, waves crashing against his flailing shouts. Every attempt to reclaim control slipped further from his grasp. The harder he screamed, the more pitiful he seemed. The chamber was no longer his stage. It belonged to her. Jasmine raised the final sheet of evidence high, letting the cameras drink it in. This is the end of the denial. This is the end of the lies. The truth is no longer buried. It is here, and it is undeniable. The roar that followed shook the walls. The chairman's gavel pounded, but even he was smiling, unable to contain the momentum of the moment. Trump slumped back in his chair, fists clenched, jaw grinding. His empire of bluster had crumbled in real time, brick by brick, word by word, and Jasmine Crockett had delivered the final blow. The people in the chamber rose to their feet, applause cascading like thunder. The sound was not just victory for her, it was catharsis for an entire nation watching the unraveling of a man who once thought himself untouchable. Trump muttered under his breath, shaking his head violently, mouthing words no one could make out. His hands gripped the table like he could claw back power through sheer force, but it was gone. Jasmine stood tall, unyielding, absorbing the moment with a poise that cut through the storm. Her voice, when she spoke again, was calm, almost soft. "History will remember this day," she said, "not for your shouting, not for your excuses, but for the truth finally standing taller than your lies." The chamber answered with another wave of applause, deafening, unrelenting. Trump, once the master of chaos, sat in silence, his face ashen, his body deflated. And the world, watching from every living room, every phone, every glowing screen, knew it without question. The balance had snapped. The battle was over. Trump had been defeated. Jasmine Crockett had won. And in the silence that followed, the chamber itself seemed to exhale. The storm of shouting, the chaos of gavel strikes, the endless swirl of accusations, all of it fell away into a moment of stillness, sharp and crystalline. Jasmine stood at the center of it, unshaken, her shoulders square, her gaze unbroken. She was no longer just a congresswoman at a hearing. She was the embodiment of something larger, something timeless, an image of justice, forged in fire, standing tall in the wreckage of deception. The cameras clung to her like moths to flame. Every angle caught the defiance in her jaw, the certainty in her eyes. Trump, meanwhile, shrank in the frame. The man who once filled every room with his sheer presence now seemed small, hunched, his skin pale under the unforgiving lights. He muttered words that no one cared to hear, his once weaponized voice reduced to static in the backdrop of history. He turned away, retreating into shadows as aides clustered at his side, guiding him out like a fallen titan, a man stripped of his armor. His silhouette wavered, unsteady, swallowed by the exit's darkened corridor. It was more than defeat. It was erasure. The chamber erupted, not in chaos this time, but in thunderous applause, a sound like a verdict carved in stone. Reporters leapt to their feet, their voices rising in a frenzy of coverage. The news cycle had already ignited, headlines writing themselves in real time. But the applause wasn't for the spectacle, it was for her, for Jasmine Crockett, who had not only faced the storm but commanded it, who had taken the lies of a former president and ground them into dust with nothing but the blade of truth. She raised her hand, not for victory, but for quiet, and the room obeyed. Her voice, as steady as a bell, cut through the stillness. Justice is not always swift. Justice is not always easy. But today proves what we already know. Justice cannot be silenced. Not by power, not by fear, not by lies. The chamber held its breath. "Delay it if you must," she continued, her words a slow, rising drumbeat. "Bury it if you dare. But justice will always rise. Always." For a moment no one moved. The truth of her words sank into the walls, into the people, into the very marrow of the moment. Then the applause came again, louder, deeper, not just celebration, but release. People cried out, clapped until their hands stung, cheered until their throats burned. And across the world, millions of viewers felt it too. In living rooms and coffee shops, in airports and dormitories, people leaned closer to their screens, their hearts pounding. Hashtags blazed across social media like wildfire. Memes were born in seconds. Clips of Jasmine's words spread faster than any campaign commercial ever could. The battle wasn't just in Washington anymore, it was global. Trump's name trended, yes, but not as conqueror, not even as contender, as cautionary tale. Jasmine's name, however, soared, synonymous now with resilience, truth, defiance. She had become more than a congresswoman. She was a symbol, and symbols are indestructible. She lowered the folder of evidence onto the desk with a final, definitive thud. The sound echoed like a gavel, like closure, like history sealing itself. Trump had left the building, but his absence was louder than his presence had ever been. Reporters swarmed the hallways, but they weren't chasing him. They were chasing her. Cameras followed Jasmine as she exited, the crowd parting like water before her. Staffers reached for her hand, colleagues clapped her shoulder, strangers called her name with voices trembling in gratitude. She didn't smile, not because she wasn't victorious, but because she understood something deeper. This was only one battle in a war that would never end. And yet, this battle mattered. It mattered because the truth had been spoken, and it had been heard. It mattered because power had tried to suffocate justice and failed. It mattered because, for one shining moment, the world had seen what it looks like when lies collapse under the weight of evidence. At the top of the marble steps outside, Jasmine paused. She turned to face the sea of cameras, the flashing lights, the people pressing forward, chanting her name. Her voice carried across the crowd, firm, unwavering. Remember this day. Remember that no one is above the truth, not even those who believe themselves untouchable. Justice delayed is not justice denied, and today, justice has prevailed. The crowd roared, the sound rippling into the night like a wave that would never break. Behind her, the chamber stood as silent witness. Before her, a nation trembled with recognition, and in the middle of it all, Jasmine Crockett stood, tall and unyielding, the symbol of what it meant to fight, the symbol of what it meant to win, the symbol of justice itself. Because justice may stumble, it may bleed, it may vanish for seasons at a time, but it never dies. And on this night, in this chamber, before the eyes of the world, justice lived. In the end, it was not power, wealth, or titles that prevailed, but the simple, stubborn strength of truth. Jasmine Crockett's stand reminded the world that justice may falter, but it never falls, not as long as there are voices willing to defend it. And so the lesson lingers. Greatness is not measured by how loud one speaks, but by the courage to speak when silence would be easier. Each of us carries that same choice, to confront falsehood, to protect what is right, and to ensure that, in our own lives, justice continues to live. If this clash shook you, don't turn away. Hold it, share it, let it echo. Pass it on to someone who still believes that lies collapse when truth refuses to bow. Subscribe to Harrison Stories, where every silence is broken and every fight for justice finds a voice. Ring the bell, because the next chapter won't be comfortable. It will be raw, unflinching, and it may just change the way you see power, corruption, and courage. This story is a fictional dramatization, born from the shadows of real injustices and the light of real defiance. Any resemblance to actual figures or events is coincidental or symbolic, meant to spark reflection, critique, and conversation. Thank you for watching. Justice is never given freely. It is wrestled from the grip of those who fear it most. This is Harrison Stories,